Hello everyone, my name is Saeed Ali Qasim and I am your instructor for the Digital Forensic and Investigation course. So in today's lecture, we'll be talking about the digital forensic domain, like what are the basic concepts in digital forensics, what is the digital forensic model, the six-step model. We'll also talk about what are the different knowledge sets that you need to possess in order to be a digital forensic investigator. And at the end, we will talk about some career paths that you can take and some challenges in the field. So the field of digital forensics emerged in the 1980s when the law enforcement realized that since the technology, say computers and later on laptops, mobile phones, they are becoming a part of our regular lives, so they can also be a part of the criminal investigation against any person. So since we use these devices in our all-day use, so they also contain different type of evidences or artifacts that can help the law enforcement agencies in order to create any case or in order to prosecute somebody. So with this realization, now the next challenge was like how we can retrieve these different artifacts from these digital devices and how we can make sure that the validity or you can say the integrity of these piece of artifacts is there and how we can use it to build our case. So that was the whole idea behind the digital forensics science or digital forensics domain. And over the years, there has been a lot of work that is being done. A lot of tools has been developed in order to extract data from digital devices of different types, such as laptops, computers, mobile phones, hard drives, and so on. So this is like the definition of digital forensics as presented at the DFR WS conference in 2001. I will not go into the detail of it. You can read it here, but it summarizes that digital forensics is the art of collecting the data from the suspect's drive, preserving the data so it is like not contaminated during the whole process. Then once you have the data, you examine it, like try to find different artifacts out of it. And based on those artifacts, after validating them that they are valid artifacts, there is no contamination or nothing, the integrity is there. Once you have those artifacts or evidences, you try to create a case against, like in favor, either in favor or against any person or any entity. So, talking about the communities in digital forensics, there are basically four communities that work within the like domain of digital forensics. First are the law enforcement agencies, like your state police, FBI, CIA, all of them use digital forensics in one way or another when they are trying to investigate any crime. The next is the military. So military also uses digital forensics in order to protect their assets as well as for offensive purposes. Then we have the business and industry community. So business and industry community is job is to protect their assets. That's their primary goal. And they in doing so, they try to incorporate digital forensic teams with their incident response teams to make sure that all the attacks that happen on their devices or their assets, they are documented properly and like mitigated properly, and using that information further policies can be made for the future. And lastly, we have the academia. So academia is mainly responsible for creating new technologies and doing research in developing new tools that the industry can use. So all of these communities that we discussed, they have their own primary objectives. So if you talk about the law enforcement agencies, their primary objective is the prosecution. So they use digital forensic knowledge in order to prosecute somebody or for their investigations of ongoing cases. Uh, Next is the military. So military is like using digital forensic knowledge for the CIA triad of their operations. So CIA is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So the military want to make sure that their assets are protected, and their secondary objective is also prosecution. So if any entity does something against these assets that are owned by the military, there can be some consequences or some cases for that as well. And the environment in which it is happening is both real time and after the event has happened. So for example, like you actively want to preserve or like protect your assets, as well as if any attack has happened after the attack, you can launch the digital investigation of that particular attack in order to get some information out of it. Business and industry, for them, it's the CIA of their assets. They want to protect their assets from any unauthorized access, and they want to like make sure that their assets are not like under attack by anyone. And again, in terms of environment here as well, it can be both real time. They actively want to protect the assets, or in case of any attack, after the attack, you can do the investigation. Lastly, the academia, the primary objective of the academia is to, like do more research. So you can say research and development. So the idea is that the academics will be doing continuous research in this field, and their other objective is to develop new tools and technologies that the rest of the different sectors can use. And this is generally also like it the research can be derived like by some event. For example, like a decade ago, Stuxnet was like a famous malware, or you can say cyber attack, that happened on nuclear power plants. So after that, there was a lot of research done on the physical PLCs, or you can say programmable logic controllers. So that one event derived the research on that particular topic or that particular device within the digital forensic domain. Next, we will talk about what are the different types of investigations that we do within the digital forensics domain. So you can say you can divide the investigations into two main categories: public investigations and private sector investigations. So first, we will talk about the private sector investigations. So private sector investigations are the one that are done within a private company. So you can have, say, internal investigations that any company do. For example, if any of the GVSU employees do something bad or like is involved in some malicious activity, GVSU can launch an internal investigation, and they can investigate that employee to make sure that to prosecute them. The next are the civil investigations. So civil investigations are also like private investigation, and they are like disputes between the two companies or dispute between the two departments or two parties and so on. And in both of the civil and internal investigations, like one can be a plaintiff and the other will be defendant. So private sector investigation includes both internal investigation and civil investigation. So the second category of the investigation are the like criminal investigations, and criminal investigations involve government and other law enforcement agencies. And in these cases, they will be the plaintiff, and the person who is accused of committing a crime will be the defendant. And all the criminal investigations, they are in the public domain, or they are called also public sector investigations. Another question arises like why do we need to differentiate, or why do we need to know what type of investigation we're going to do? So this is very important because the type of the investigation will determine the whole scope of the investigation. For example, if you are doing any internal investigation, you will have to follow different set of rules. You will have to follow different laws in order to do that. Whereas if you are doing like criminal investigations, the whole scope of the investigation will be different, and the procedures, the laws that you need to follow are way different in both public and private sector investigations. So here is a summary of both the public and private sector investigations. So in private sector, you have the internal investigations, where like any company can perform internal investigation within the company, and they can like determine, their scope would be to determine if somebody violated the company policies. When you are doing internal level investigations, you don't need to follow any legal documents. So whatever is the company's policy, that will be your like set of guidelines which you can use. Here for like internal investigations, you can also use like your own tools that you develop for digital forensics, and the funding would depend on the size of the company and how much they are willing to invest in this case. Next are the civil investigations. Their scope will be mainly the civil issues. And in civil investigation, in order to, get data from any accused, to make copies of their hard drives from their PCs, we would need to get a subpoena from the court. So this is something, you can see the difference, that we are not no more talking about the company policies. Now we have to involve the court of law as well. And when we involve the court of law, we can, no longer use our own tools that we developed. We have to stick with, already published tools for digital forensics that are out there. Lastly, the criminal investigations, they will be criminal activities. For example, if somebody is sending extortion emails, or somebody is trying to, sell child porn or something like pornography or something like that. So depending on what is the scope of the investigation, what is the type of the investigation, it would determine the scope. And based on the scope of the investigation, you will determine if you need any type of legal documents, whether you need a subpoena, you need a warrant, or you can just go ahead and seize the suspect's computer. And also the tools and techniques that you can use, they also vary from one investigation type to another. Next, we will talk about the different branches within the digital forensics. So the main branch that we will be looking at is the computer forensics. That would be the core of this course. But apart from that, there are other sub branches as well, such as mobile forensics, network forensics. We have email forensics and image forensics. So the major chunk of the course will be on the computer science forensics, but we will also have a couple of lectures on network forensics. We'll also talk about email forensics and image forensics. In computer forensics, there are two basic categories. One, you can say disk forensics, in which you examine the hard drives or USBs, or say other drives that are there, like the hardware that is there on the computer. The second is the memory forensics. And in memory forensics, you examine the RAM of any digital device, like whether you are examining the laptop of the accused or PC, or you are looking at the mobile phone. You will be looking at the RAM. Why we need to look at the RAM? Because most of the programs that are running on a device, they run inside the RAM of that device. And similarly, in disk forensics, our goal is to examine the disk. And while doing that, we can recover deleted files. We can also look at the metadata of different files. Whereas in memory forensics, our goal is more to doing the analysis of malwares, whether there are any malwares or any malicious programs that are running on the accused machine. So the next is how we can do the whole process of physical digital forensics. And for that, Cruz and Heiser, they presented the 4-step model, which the basic steps are assess, acquire, analyze, and report. So the first step, assessment, this is the very first thoughts that you will compile about the case. And the first thing would be to determine the scope of the case, or the type of investigation that you are doing. So once you identify the type of investigation, if it's, for example, criminal investigation, you will have to involve law and order. You will have to get certain warrants in order to access any data, or in order to seize any data. And if it is an internal investigation, then you can just stick to the company policies. Company in this case will be the entity that hires you to perform the digital investigation for them. So after performing taking all the due steps that are required, for example, if you need to get a subpoena or a warrant in order to get the documents, or in order to get your hands on the suspect's machine, or you can just request the company to give you access to the suspect machine. So after doing all that, completing all the legal work for your assessment, in the assessment part, the next step is acquiring. So in the acquire stage, you go to the crime scene, or go to the suspect where the crime might have happened, or if the police have already their laptop or other digital devices confiscated, you will go there and you will try to make copies of the data. And for doing that, first of all, we will need to know what different type of tools we need to use. For example, if we are like imaging, or if we are making a copy of a hard drive, versus if we are like taking an image or a snapshot of the memory of the laptop or a machine, the tools used in both those cases will be different. And depending on the scope of our investigation, we have to identify the tools that are necessary for this type of acquisition. The next thing will be, we have to like determine what data we need to collect, and like from where to get that data. So like a rule is, whenever you go, like whenever you get a chance to acquire the data, try to, gather as much as you can. So for example, if you are examining a laptop or like a PC, you need to like collect data from the hard drive, make copies of the hard drive of the suspect machine, make snapshots, take snapshots of the memory, so you have the memory content as well. If there is any external hard drive connected, or if there is a USB, like collect the data from those devices as well. So after collecting the data, then the next step is creating multiple copies. So why do we need to create multiple copies? Because when we are doing our analysis, there is a chance that some of the data that we have collected, it can get corrupted, right? Because you are like running tools trying to figure out different things in the data. So there is a chance of corruption. So to avoid contaminating our original case data, because if we contaminate the original case data, we might not get a chance to collect it again, because we will have to follow the legal process again, and it will be like a time taking process. So try to make digitally, like forensically sound copies of the data that you collect, like by making multiple copies. If you have hard drive, like just make 3 or 4 different copies of the hard drive, take their checksums to make sure that like later on, if you need to compare the two hard drives, you can compare the checksums to see if there is any corruption or not. The next is the analyze part. So after you have acquired the data, now it's the time to do the analysis. And in that, you can do different type of analysis. For example, if you have the memory or the RAM image, you can do live data like analysis. So you can look into the processes that were running there. Similarly, if you're doing hard disk forensic or disk forensics, you can do static data analysis, where you can try to recover the different like files that are there on the hard drive. Similarly, you can also look into the network data, what connections were opened on the PC. Like they will also fall under the live data domain, because most of the network information is inside the RAM. But you can look into the connections that the accused made during using that laptop or that PC. And the last step in this model is the report, where like from like whatever you collected, whatever data you collected, you would document it, what steps you took in order to like figure out or find some evidences, you will document that. And lastly, like what is your you can say a result based on those evidences. So you will document all these processes, and that all that documentation would become a part of your reporting. So you will collect all the data, prepare your report, and the last step is the presentation. So for example, if you are hired by law enforcement agencies, you will like give them the summary of your investigation, that this is what we found in this particular investigation. So there is another model which is represented by Casey, and it is more refined, I would say. So this model has 6 steps rather than 4. So the first step is identification or assessment. So it is similar to the previous one. You assess like the case, you assess the scope of the investigation, and depending on that, you take all the steps to getting like all the legal documents, warrants, subpoenas, and so on, and making sure that you are legally okay to make and collect and make copies of the data. The next step is the collection. So once like you have followed all the laws, all the procedures, and you have access now to the accused machine, you need to collect as much data as possible from there. So collect, like make copies of the hard drive, the RAM, if there is like any external hard drive, USB, whatever you find on the accused machine, try to acquire that. The next step is the preservation. So preservation, as we mentioned in the previous slide, is basically creating multiple copies of the data. So in this step, you want to make sure that the data that you collected or your original data is preserved, and there is no contamination, or there is no change in that original copy. So a best rule is, whenever you acquire the data, try to make sure that you make multiple copies of it and work on one of those multiple copies. Like when you're doing your examination and analysis, do that on one of the copies. Another thing is, while you are collecting the data, you want to make sure that that data collection work is not affecting the physical state of the machine or of the hard drive. So for example, if you are doing a live acquisition, and you want to try to capture the memory of the RAM, and if you are doing, while doing so, you open another program on the suspect machine, it will contaminate the RAM, because now the new program that you opened will also be shown in the memory. So just try to make sure that the collection method itself is not altering or is not changing the state of the crime scene or suspect's computer. So after that, the next part is examination. So you identified your case, you got all the legal documents, then you went to the crime scene, you acquired as much data as possible, you made multiple copies of it, and now it's time for the examination. So here in the examination stage, you will just discover or mine the knowledge. So for example, if there are any deleted files, you will try to recover them. You will also try to see what programs were running on the suspect drive, what internet connections were open from the suspect machine, and so on. So in examination stage, you just unearth or uncover all the evidences or individual pieces of evidences that are there in the data. Then is the analysis part. In analysis part, you will try to combine all the evidences that you uncovered in the examination state, and based on those evidences, you will try to link them with each other and try to create a story or your argument. And last part is the reporting. So in reporting, you basically document all these steps that you took from assessment to analysis. You will report everything, like what was the case, how, what data did you collect from the case, how did you make sure the data was protected, what type of examination did you do, like what artifacts did you found, and based on that, what is your assessment, whether you say this person is guilty, or it is not guilty of doing any crime, and so on. So let's talk about the first step of the six-step model, which is the identification or assessment. So as I mentioned earlier, in this step, you would basically define your case. So first thing to look at is the scope of the examination. See what type of investigation you are doing. Based on that, you would look into what are the legal documents that you need. For example, if you are doing a civil or a criminal investigation, you will need to get a subpoena or a warrant in order to acquire the data from the suspect. So once you make sure all these things are done, the next step is to identify the tools that you need. For example, depending on the operating system, depending on the device that you are examining, you would need to have different type of tools. Another thing is, make sure that the person who's going to acquire the data, he is technically, sound, and the person is capable of doing that. And the last thing is to identify the stakeholders. So for example, if we are doing a criminal investigation, there will be two stakeholders, the accused party and the law enforcement agency. Similarly, in civil cases, you will have different stakeholders, like as accused and defendant and so on. So the next step is collection. So when you are acquiring the data, first of all, you have to make sure to maintain the integrity and the authenticity of the data. So the first step is when you go there, you have to make the copies of the data that are used for reliable analysis. So for example, when you acquire the data, try to make multiple copies and then perform the analysis on those copies. When you are doing this acquisition, try to make sure that the process of acquiring the data doesn't alter or doesn't change the anything on the accused PC. So for example, if you are there acquiring the data, don't try to create or copy paste or do any other file operation on the suspect machine. And also try to make sure that you are not opening new softwares, because that can also alter the RAM of the data. The tools that you use, they should be valid, so there shouldn't be like, any misconfiguration or any crashes from tools that can alter the suspect's machine. And another thing which is very important is when you go there to acquire the data, try to make sure that you collect everything that is possible. So don't leave any hard drive or any, like if you see a flash drive, don't like leave it there. Try to make sure that you make copies of all the different memory mediums that are out there. Why it is important? Because sometimes, like in some civil or criminal cases, you might not get a second chance to make a copy. For example, like that device might be altered, or the suspect like did something like deleted or try to like erase the data from it. So whenever you get a chance, after following the proper legal procedure, try to make sure that you collect as much data as there to collect, and make copies of it, multiple copies of it. The next step is the preservation. So in this step, we will try to, like make sure that the data we collect, it is preserved and it is not altered by our investigation. So first step, always make multiple copies, never work on the original data. The next thing is the hard drives that you use to copy. For example, like if you copy the hard drive of the suspect machine into your own hard drive, you need to make sure that the hard drive that you are using is not contaminated. Like there are no old case files on your hard drive, or there is no like any malware or any virus on your own hard drive that you are using to copy the data. The last thing is the chain of custody. So chain of custody is basically when you exchange data from one person to another. For example, you acquired the data from suspect machine, then you gave it to one of your colleagues for analysis. So this process of data changing, like going from one hand to another or one person to another, this should be documented as well. And this document is called chain of custody. We will talk about it later in the lecture. So the examination part is where you will like unearth the different evidences. So when you are doing the analysis, we will look into the file system that is on the accused machine. We will look into slack spaces. We will look into unallocated spaces, hidden partitions, and so on. So don't worry, don't get overwhelmed with it. We will like discuss all of them throughout the course. So we'll discuss like what the slack spaces are, or unallocated spaces, or how we can hide the partitions and how we can recover the data from that. Also, like the tools that you use, they should be valid. So if you use your own homegrown tools, then you will have to like provide some documentation for that as well. But generally, like the tools that are used in digital forensics, they are published. So like they are in public domain and everybody has the knowledge of them. So the next thing is, after you have discovered some evidence, for example, you found some deleted files, you recovered them. What next? How we can, like say that those deleted files like link the accused with the crime. So that is your analysis part. So this is here, your like detective mode will turn on. So depending on the data that you extracted or the evidence that you extracted in your analysis part, you need to come up with a story, or you need to link those individual like evidences with each other in order to make your case, or in order to make your argument. So this is a very like most important task of the whole digital forensics, that if you have the individual evidences, individual pieces of information, how you can link them together. So this will be a discussion question for you guys. Like one of the discussion questions, I will post it on Blackboard as well. Like what is the difference between the examination and analysis? So the last part in the six-step model is the reporting. So reporting is basically, like documenting everything that you do in this whole process. And it begins when, you are first approached to do the investigation. Like the first steps, the assessment, you will put it into the document. Then, like all the case documents, whether you got warrants or subpoenas in order to acquire the data, then what like data acquisition did you made, whether you confiscated some hard drives or USBs from the crime scene, and so on. Similarly, there is also like, the whole process that you took for examination and analysis, the tools that you used, and so on. You will also document that. And the last part is your analysis, like based on all that evidence, what is your verdict or what is your analysis of the whole situation? That and conclusion will also be part of your report. So this is the simplified version of the, like digital investigation from data to evidence. So first we, like collect the data after following all the legal processes. Then we examine it, like try to find different hidden things in it, try to recover different forensic artifacts from the data. After collecting those artifacts, we analyze them, try to link them together to make an argument. And lastly, we write the report that these are the evidences that we found in this case. So based on these evidences, this is our analysis that say like, person is guilty of something or not. So you can give your recommendations or your assessment on each particular case. So let's talk about the different type of documentations that you'll be doing. So there are basically, like four different type of documentations. The first is general case documentation. Then we have procedural documentation, process documentation, and the timeline. So let's talk about the general documentation. So the general documentation would begin, like the moment you are asked up to investigate any instance or investigate any crime. So it will contain, like who approached you, what was the incident, when the incident happened, like all the basic information or the first information that you receive about each case. So like you start documenting about the case from the very beginning. So the first thing will be your general case documentation, which will have the information like of the incident, when it happened, what are the parties that are involved in it, some description of the incident, and so on. So why do we need to like, know all of that? Because depending on all the information that we receive from the party that, like contacts us for doing the forensic investigation for them, based on that, we can determine the scope of the investigation, whether it's, the internal investigation, whether it's a civil investigation or criminal investigation. And depending on the scope of the investigation, we can plan ahead, and if it's a criminal or civil, we will start taking the like legal route, and we'll try to get subpoenas and warrants in order to get our hands on the data. Otherwise, like if it's an internal investigation, we will just like ask the company to provide us the data. Another important thing to remember here is to, like once you determine the scope of the investigation, you have to stick with it. So for example, if you are investigating a case in which somebody is, like accused for stealing trade secrets from one company to another. So in this case, we will be looking at, say, PDF files or Excel files or Word files that might contain the, like the data, or that might contain the secret information that we're looking for. So in these type of cases, our primary focus would be to search for these type of files on the suspect machine, and we will not look into other things on the machine. So depending on your scope of the investigation, it can give you an idea that what type of evidence you should look at, what should be your top priority, what should be your second top priority, and so on in the accused machine. So the next is the procedural document. So the procedural document is basically, like documenting the whole crime scene. Like when you went there, what was the condition of the original scene, whether there was one laptop, one PC, was there any mobile or not, the names and contacts of the individuals that you interviewed. So for example, if you go to a company, or if you go to a crime scene, you will be interviewing some people, like whose laptop it is, who was the person who's using this machine, and so on. So you have to document all of that. Another thing is like all the physical devices that you might confiscate. For example, if there was a laptop on the crime scene, or if there's like a USB on the crime scene, you have to document their make and model, like who is the who is the creator of the device, and what is the size of, say, this USB drive, and so on. Another thing is photographs. So like most of the times, people like display some information out in the open. For example, you might have seen some people write the passwords and they store it in the form of like a diary or something like that. So the photographs of the crime scene, or like where the suspect computer was, like say suspect's work desk and so on, it can also give you a lot of other information as well. The next step is the process documentation. So the process documentation is basically the part of documentation where will you like write down everything, all the processes that you performed, or all the analysis that you performed on the given forensic artifacts. So here you will like list down the tools that you used. For example, if you use autopsy, you use FTK imager and so on. So you will list down the tools that you used, what individual functionalities of those tools did you use. For example, I used say FTK imager to take a snapshot of the accused machine. Similarly, I used autopsy in order to recover the deleted files from the suspect's drive. So all the tools that you used, you will mention that. Most of the time, if you are using like publicly available tools, you will have to refer to their user manuals, installation manuals, readmes, guides, so on, in order to like document the whole process. So for example, you will have to mention that FTK imager provides this particular functionality for recovering the deleted files. So you will have to refer to the user manual and link those functionalities with the user manual.